Hi everyone, in this video we're going to be taking a look at how to describe a stimulus, which is going to help you to get ready for paper 1 question 5 for English language. Specifically we're going to be focusing on how to describe the weather. This is often something that comes up in the exam, so it's a really good idea to take a look at it as well. Look at the adjectives and use them to predict the topic or the theme of today's lesson. So we have then malicious, powerful, despair, piercing, deadly and trepidation. So what I'd like you to do is to have a look at these words and think, what might they be relating to? If you're not too sure what they mean, think about our stretch and challenge task at the top. Can you define what each of these words mean? If you're not too sure, don't worry about it too much because we will be going through it in a little bit more detail in a moment. As feedback, check your answers against the ones below. So you can see here on our left hand side we have our keywords, and on the right we have the definitions as well. So first of all then we have malicious. So if you're not sure what this means, it means hateful or spiteful. Next we have piercing, which is sharp, intense or loud. We have despair, which is hopelessness, gloom or misery. Trepidation, a really good adjective to use, which is fear and anxiety. Deadly, which means dangerous and harmful. And finally we have powerful, which means strong or influential. By the end of the lesson, you'll be able to recall how to approach a stimulus. If you're not too sure what I mean by that, there is the image that you're given for your question 5. Understand how to craft an opening paragraph, and then we're going to apply your understanding to actually write your response and submit it to get some feedback so that you can improve. Look at the image and attempt the challenges that follow. So the first thing I'd like to think about, if you think about this image, which is the one we're going to be using to attempt our question 5, is what kind of atmosphere is being created, and then if you can, think which of the adjectives that we've already looked at could you use to describe this. Now if you're someone who likes to plan and get a mind map, then that's absolutely fine. It's always a good idea to come up with a few ideas based on the image. What we're going to do now, however, is we're going to look at the actual mark scheme. We're going to think about how we can actually impress the examiner to make sure we get a high mark in our exam. Impressing the examiner. So what are they looking for in a high value response? So this is the mark scheme. You can see how on the right hand side. Now the problem with this is that it's quite hard to actually really put your finger on what is it that they're after. And what we're going to do in each of these lessons is we're going to break down these bullet points. We're going to focus specifically on what would get you a reasonable mark. So the first thing we're going to focus on here is thinking about crafting of linguistic devices. So what this means essentially that if you want to produce a high level response, you must focus on crafting your writing. This is not only using language techniques, but making sure the techniques you use create an effective imagery for the reader. And what we mean by that basically is, are you just throwing in your language techniques here and there just because you know it will get you a mark? Or are you actually thinking about how can I craft this language technique to create really vivid images for the reader and really engage them in the story or the description that I'm trying to convey? Learning focus. How do you craft your creative writing? So what we want to think about is the following points then. So in order to craft your writing, you need to use language techniques but avoid cliches. Now if you're not too sure what I mean by this, a cliche is something that's been overused. So for example, you might think that when you're doing your writing, you're going to use a simile, which is absolutely fantastic. However, you want to avoid some of the more obvious similes, so such as things like the man ran as fast as lightning, or something along a similar vein. Those are the kind of things you want to avoid. The same with personification, saying things like the tree waved or the sun smiled is something that every single year 7 across the country has thought of before, so you need to think about something a bit more unique and a bit more original. Next one will be use ambitious vocabulary to support your techniques. So it's not enough just to use them here or there, use them together to actually craft some vivid imagery for the audience. And again, like we just said, use that imagery to engage the audience and bring them to the world you've created. We want them to actually imagine the things that you're thinking about, and if you are using cliches, if you're using things that aren't really well described, then you're not going to be able to actually engage them and get them absorbed in the story you're trying to tell. Look at the two examples. Which one has crafted their writing? So think back to what we've just said in the previous slide. Here is our first example. So it says there, the snow fell softly on the ground and looked like a white blanket on the ground. An angry breeze was blowing the snow all around. There was no one on the road except for the solitary car that moved slowly because the weather was so bad. Behind the wheel of the car, Sam gripped the wheel in fear it would go off the road. He knew the road was dangerous, but he couldn't afford to go back. Too much hung in the balance. So what I'd like to think about is, can you read through and identify where the writer has used any language techniques, and then can you identify where the writer has actually crafted their writing? If you find that there's not many examples of this, that's absolutely fine, but you should try and actually justify your ideas. You can also leave a comment below if you've got any comments that you want to make on the quality of this student's writing. Now if you want to pause the video and go through it at your own time, please feel free to do so. We're now going to jump ahead and look at Student 2. Student 2. Like an unstoppable force, the snow attacked the landscape, smothering the road and obscuring the way forward. Maliciously, the wind struck out at anyone foolish enough to venture this way. Cautiously, a solitary vehicle crept forward. Its tires were not built for this terrain. Like a baby with no teeth, they tried in vain to latch onto something. The engine roared in frustration as the car slowly crept forward. Inside the car, Sam gripped the wheel and fought off the feeling of despair that sat like a block of ice in his stomach. He knew the road was deadly, but he couldn't afford to go back. Too much hung in the balance. So all I want you to do then, you can see that both of these examples have used very similar ideas and even repeated some of the similar phrases, is think about where has the writer used some techniques, and see if you can understand where the actual writer has used some language techniques, some vocabulary, all those things that we talked about to actually craft their writing. Class feedback. Compare your ideas to the teacher's comments. So here on the left hand side then we've got student 2, who is the more successful writer in this case, and if we look at the actual teacher's comments on the right hand side we can see why. So first of all, what went well? The responses indicated conscious crafting of language. So if we look at this a little bit more carefully, like an unstoppable force, the snow attacked the landscape, smothering the road and obscuring the way forward. If you think about the kind of words and phrases that have been used here, it's a lot more intellectual than the previous response. Also, we have a simile to start us off, and then it's talking about some form of personification with the snow attacking the landscape. That is then continued as it uses words like smothering or smothered and obscuring the way forward. So rather than simply just thinking about can I use a language technique here, they're thinking a bit more broadly and thinking the kind of ways that they can actually craft the response. The student has used a range of ambitious vocabulary, so you might have noticed that a lot of the words that I've used here were some of the words that we looked at the start of the video. And the response matches the purpose of the task. So it's important that you think about the tone that's given by the image or the scenario that you're writing about, and is that actually reflected in the writing you're producing. Next we have EBI, so even better if. So to carry on in this quality, it will be quite a difficult thing to do. We have to remember that the person's only produced 3 paragraphs at the moment, and these are quite short paragraphs, so you would at least need to have 5 paragraphs. And the difficult thing that people tend to struggle with is, can you actually write consistently at this level for the rest of your response? Look back at the writing task and attempt the challenges that follow. So the first thing I'd like you to do is, can you try and write the opening part of a story about a place that is severely affected by the weather, and again you can use the image that we looked at the start. The super challenge, try to use 3 or more language devices to craft your writing. So again, just to remind you, when we're talking about crafting our writing, we don't mean we're just going to throw in the language techniques. We're also going to think about how can you use them to actually create vivid imagery for the reader. And the final one, mega challenge, submit your response to be marked and respond to the feedback. So really, you're only writing about 1 paragraph. You should aim for about anywhere between 100 to 200 words at most. We want to make sure that you're just trying to develop a small piece of writing so that eventually over the weeks we can put it all together for one big response as well. Now in terms of our next lesson, we're going to be going over the following things. So we're going to recall how to use structure in your writing. We're going to understand how to engage the audience, and then finally we're going to apply your understanding to write your second paragraph using the same image that we've been working on in this lesson. Now if you need any additional support or help, the new videos will be added every single week. Alternatively, you can also check out our partner channel Bookworm Teaching for more lessons and guidance on all things English. Thanks ever so much for listening guys, and all the best with your work in the future. Bye bye.